Ashley Victoria Robinson.
And I'm Jason Inman.
And we've run from 221B Baker Street to bring you a review and recap of Sherlock Season 4, Episode 3, The Final Problem. And if you haven't watched this episode, we are going to go into detail, so there are major spoilers ahead, and you might want to come back later. The final problem starts with a little girl on an airplane, and she's the only one awake and afraid that it might crash. Cut to Mycroft watching a black and white movie. Then everything shuts off in his house. He takes out a sworn cage to protect himself and discovers that there is a clown who's broken into his home. But then suddenly Sherlock and John appear, and it has just been a ruse the entire time. Cut back to 221B Baker Street, where Mycroft shows up as a client. He explains who Euros is, that she is their younger sister, and that her name means the East Wind, and East Wind is coming, and that can't be good. We get a series of flashbacks explaining more about her. We hear things like Nemo Holmes, the song is the answer, and that Euros burned down the original family home. She is now being held at Sharonford, where uncontainables are kept away from society. Then suddenly a drone with a grenade breaks into 221B Baker Street. We get a Lady Bracknell joke before everybody has to run away from the explosion. Whew, we get a lot of stuff happening in the beginning of this episode, and I want to address the one and only Easter egg that we have. The original Arthur Conan Doyle story, very famous, where Sherlock and Moriarty have their final showdown.
Fight on a waterfall.
Exactly, the Reichenbach Falls story is derivative of this. There are almost no Easter eggs from the original story in this episode, but we have a lot of in-canon Easter eggs, including their flat blows up for the second time in 4 seasons, which is a callback to when Sherlock is inside the flat and an explosion comes from across the street and they have to do some redecorating. So, what do you think about starting completely away from the other characters with this little girl on the plane?
I mean, I thought it was a little weird. It did come off as very Doctor Who to me.
Interesting.
It really seemed like Doctor Who because it seemed like, oh, there's this problem. We don't know what it is. And it's very weird because Sherlock generally deals with like murders or kidnappings or spouses cheating on each other. So the deal with a crashing plane seemed a little bit different. But I'll actually be honest with you. I really like the beginning of this episode because I really liked the editing in the flashbacks of Mycroft and how the camera kept turning and you were seeing like this the burning embers falling around him. I really dug that a lot. I also noticed that there were some really neat little Easter eggs for me anyways in this. Nemo Holmes might be a reference to, and I don't know, like we learn later in the episode what it is learned by, but in Alan Moore's very famous comic book series, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Mycroft Holmes is a character in it. He's the one that puts the league together, and in there is Captain Nemo, and it is very heavily hinted in the first 2 volumes of The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen that Captain Nemo is Sherlock. And
that's
that
cool.
Sherlock Holmes is hiding as Captain Nemo because it's one of his great disguises. I never read past the 2nd volume, so it might have been confirmed, but it was very heavily hinted that was Sherlock. So I don't know whether Nemo Holmes is a reference to that or not, but I thought it was cool. As a comic book fan, I thought that was neat. Also, Sharonford.
Sharonford, yeah.
As the name of the prison, which is the name of the brother from the Pastiche.
Yes, I thought it was interesting. I think there's a good chance it is a nod at the comics because Stephen Moffat's a big comic book nerd. He's a big dork, so that would be really interesting if that is in fact what that was from. I thought it was weird that we're giving the sister a Greek name when Sherlock and Mycroft and Sharonford are all very old English names. And I like the idea of like an East Wind is coming. Like that's a nice piece of imagery, but it seemed a little out of place to me.
Totally.
Then we suddenly find ourselves on a boat where pirates Sherlock and John take over in order to bring themselves to Sharonford. Sherlock leaves a note outside in the sand that says, "Tell my sister I'm here." He breaks into the prison and finds Euros playing a Stradivarius violin, no less. And we learn that Euros has enslaved the warden of the prison and that Mycroft and John, who've been talking to him, are in trouble after all. Her cell is not really a cell, and she sets off a Moriarty alarm, which cuts to a Moriarty flashback 5 years later, where Mycroft had brought Moriarty in as a gift for Euros on Christmas. Then suddenly our heroes find themselves inside the cell where they're receiving periodic calls from the girl on the plane from the first episode. They have to help her land the plane. The governor who's in charge of this prison is also in there with them, and Euros presents them with the idea that they have to kill the governor or else she will kill his wife, and it has to be done by either Mycroft or John. All right, let's unpack a couple in-canon Easter eggs. We have references to Redbeard and Sherlock as a pirate. Sherlock as a pirate is something from the very first season where Mycroft says when Sherlock was a little kid, he wanted to be a pirate. I think it's a throwaway remark that's been referenced to several times in flashbacks, and we get to see Sherlock dressed up as a little pirate here. And Redbeard is, of course, his dog, who we met last season in his Mind Palace. He's got the long red hair, and you see in a bunch of scenes here, which is really, really cool. John says Vatican cameos, which you will remember from Scandal in Belgravia, the Irene Adler episode that Sherlock says when everyone is supposed to like duck and leave the room. It's supposed to be a callback to an old case that's actually mentioned in the canon, although we never see that story, which is really cool. And we have Sherlock playing 2 different songs for his little sister. He plays a Bach piece, which during not the Great Game, but the second the Reichenbach Fall. During the Reichenbach Fall, he's playing Bach, and Moriarty comes in and is like, your Bach is terrible. And Euros also tells him that his Bach is terrible, so that's kind of funny. And then when she says, play some of your own composition, he plays Irene's theme, which is a classic, again from Scandal in Belgravia. Okay, so we pretty much immediately established through action as much as dialogue that Euros is more powerful and smarter than both Mycroft and Sherlock, who we know are pretty powerful in their own right. How do you feel about every new Holmes sibling being smarter than all the rest?
I mean, I think I'm more concerned about the Sherlock's inability to not recognize that there's a sheet of glass in front of him.
Yeah, that's a weird reveal, and I have mixed feelings about. So during the episode, of course, we see that there are signs on the glass which are meant to establish that there's glass hanging there.
And he doesn't get it until he's literally a foot away from her.
Yeah.
And he doesn't get it until she actually touches her hand.
Yeah.
And I was like, you would be able to see that there's not glass there.
Especially if you're Sherlock Holmes. I mean, that's something that's completely done for the audience.
Yes, and I get it, and you want the big hoodwink reveal. The other thing about this, let's talk about the interesting Moriarty stuff.
Yeah.
So we're revealed that of course, we talked about that Mycroft gave Moriarty
2 euros as a Christmas gift, that she gets treats every year.
She gets treats every year.
One was the Stradivarius violin, which is, of course, the greatest violin ever made. And the other is 5 minutes unaccompanied talk with Moriarty.
And it says it was 5 years ago. Now, we know that Sherlock shot Charles Magnuson in 2014, at the end of 2014, because that was the Christmas episode, the Christmas Day episode. And we just looked this up on the Sherlock official wiki timeline or whatever. So if you were to step back, that they're now in 2015 because some time has passed, but it hasn't been 2 years like it has been for us.
Yes.
So 5 years previous on Christmas Day would put that at 2009, which is interesting because that is right before John and Sherlock meet in January of 2010. So that means that Mycroft basically causes this whole television series to happen.
Right, so yeah, the implication of this being that Euros, because they say that she can enslave people and control people, even though they don't, like, explain how, and she's not a mutant.
Yeah, like, she's the one who gave, like, Moriarty the idea.
Because he was sort of looking into Sherlock, which we know that Mycroft knew before as well. I have a lot of mixed feelings about this.
How do you feel about that?
I feel terrible about it.
Okay.
I think I said this in the last video, but I don't like a reality where anyone is smarter than Sherlock. To me, that defeats the entire purpose of, like, why this character is interesting.
Yes.
I'll give you Mycroft maybe, but you have to assume that Moriarty's not smarter, but he thinks differently than Sherlock, which is why they can counterbalance each other.
Well, I always think about Moriarty, sorry to interrupt you, is that I feel Moriarty is like the Joker to Batman.
Yes.
Like, Batman can plan everything, and Batman is so smart. And it's not that the Joker is smarter than Batman, it's just that the Joker is unpredictable. Moriarty is unpredictable as well to Sherlock's smartness.
Right, and to have that all be controlled by a vengeful sister who hasn't seen him in 35 years.
30-some-ish years? Yeah.
I think is a little cheap. Do you disagree?
I don't know. I have a lot of weird feelings about Eros. Eros? Is that how you say it? Euros. I don't care.
Yeah.
I actually like the idea of Moriarty because I was so glad because we got so many comments from last week where everybody was like, Moriarty's gonna be in this episode. He's alive. And I was like, no, he's not. He's dead. I was glad we got to see Andrew Scott as Moriarty, but yes, I do agree with you that, like, it is a little convenient. I don't know. The reveal that Moriarty's behind the whole show kind of works for me. The idea that it happens because of Sister Holmes saying, like, go do this is where it stretches my reality.
So how did you feel about the reveal that she managed to convince him to, like, shoot audio and video of himself so that she could hold it to play for Sherlock later on the TVs?
Okay, I hated that.
Yeah.
And we were watching the episode, and several times they kept cutting these stupid clips. I get it. Andrew Scott as Moriarty is your best villain. He's the best villain you've had on the show in 4 years, okay, in 4 seasons. But it's time to move on.
I agree.
It's time to move on because just showing video clips of Andrew Scott going like, woo, woo, on board to the next station, or like tick-tock, 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 was the most annoying thing ever. And also, let's question the reality of this show. This show is pretty far-fetched anyway, but where the hell do you think that she convinced Mycroft to let her bring Moriarty back, because they didn't do that in that 5 minutes,
No.
to get him to stand in front of like a white wall and record all this weird phrases? She's like, oh yeah, say tick-tock, tick-tock for a minute. Why, love? Because I might need it like 5 years in the future when you're dead. Okay, tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock.
It's also like, it's a good camera and it's good audio. It's not shot on someone's cell phone or a laptop. Like, there's production value
But
here.
also, there's inherently, as we'll get onto it, there's a line that Moriarty says where he's like, I knew it would come down to Holmes versus Holmes. So that implies that Euros told him her entire plan down to them coming to that prison, and then told him exactly what she was going to do.
Then why did he die?
So that he could record a video about it. Yeah, so exactly. Then why did he die?
Why did he shoot himself? He said he was bored. She's not boring.
I mean, if he knew where it was going,
why bother?
well,
Why not just go hang out with her more?
That's the point where it got a little ridiculous. Like, if they would have just left it at the flashback, if they would have just left it at that, then I'd have been fine with it.
And I want to ask one more thing before we move on. How do you feel about this first scene of Euros' game where she's forcing one of them to shoot the governor in order to save his wife?
It's fine, I guess.
Did you think Mycroft was going to do it?
No, I actually from the beginning thought John would do it.
See, I thought Mycroft would do it, and they have this weird scene where he plays it very like, oh, like death sickens me, and like, no, I have a moral code. But Mycroft has several times in previous episodes been very cavalier about death and like, oh, don't be so emotional about it.
He's very cowardly in this episode.
Yeah, it feels very anti what the character's been established as so far.
No, I figured John would do it, actually, and I was kind of surprised. But I'm glad that John at the last minute was like, oh, okay, I can't do it.
I agree.
So
the governor shoots himself anyway to save his wife, but it doesn't work, and Euros shoots him. Then Mycroft, Sherlock, and John are let out. They move into a different room where they talk to the girl on the plane again, but they can't quite help her. They're forced to solve a murder of a man using only a rifle, and Euros hangs all 3 possible murderers out the window. Sherlock makes his deduction, and Euros kills all the brothers anyway, rendering everything they did kind of meaningless. They move on after that to a room with a coffin. They have to call Molly Hooper and make her tell Sherlock, I love you, which he manages to do just in the nick of time. Sherlock destroys the coffin because he can't handle what he's being asked to do. After that, they move on to an empty room, and Sherlock is forced to decide whether he's going to kill Mycroft or John. All right, so we're moving on through Euros' madhouse.
And this is the scene that we talked about, where in this scene, Moriarty does go, I knew it'd be Holmes versus Holmes.
Yeah. It's very strange. So we have this scene where Sherlock has a rifle that is conveniently attached to his ceiling. By the way, points to Euros for like jerry-rigging this entire place to be the mousetrap like maze.
You mean this volcano layer of a James Bond villain?
Yeah, that apparently she's managed to manipulate everyone to do whatever she wants to.
Yeah, everybody in this prison, who, by the way, are federal employees of the United Kingdom.
Yeah. So I think Sherlock manages to make the deductions for the first one pretty quickly. I thought the move of hanging them out the windows was interesting, although I thought they were all going to be dropped. Did you ever think they were making it out of there alive?
No. I mean, it's one of those situations where anytime you're put into a hostage situation like that, and they're like, kill this person, so I won't kill that person. It's like, no matter what I do, you're going to kill that person, so why do I even bother?
Yeah. But so they play along, and then John has a line where he says to Mycroft, and then he later says to Sherlock, we have to be soldiers today because they're trying to help this little girl on the plane. And this, to me, is the biggest callback that we've had maybe since season 1 to John as a soldier. I thought that Martin Freeman delivered the line very well, and I thought that he managed to be the most collected of everyone in the scene, so I liked this line. What did you think about it?
I liked it until Martin Martin Freeman had completely invalidated it in the very next scene.
Right. Okay. So
because he said that line to Sherlock in when the three brothers are hanging down.
Yeah.
And in the very next scene, he's just like, ah, and Sherlock's like, no, we have to be soldiers. And he's like, oh yeah, I forgot.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sherlock. And you're like, wait a minute, what? I don't know. Like, this was the point where the episode jumped off a cliff to me because I was like, I feel like I'm watching a weird James Bond movie mixed in with Doctor Who, because the idea that there's like this puzzle and you have to make decisions, Sherlock.
And we're going to use it as like a cameo for Molly because we've just wasted her this season.
I was like, this comes off to me as the ultimate of fan fiction. This does not come off as a Sherlock episode. And to be honest with you, the moments of this episode that I liked the most was where Sherlock was trying to deduce things. And I went back to it and I was like, man, I miss again Sherlock solving murders.
Yeah.
What the Sherlock Holmes stories are about.
I will say
solving murders.
I thought that he was gonna shoot Mycroft, and I was really looking forward to that, and I was kind of bummed that it didn't happen.
I thought he was gonna shoot Mycroft as well, and I kind of wish he had.
I thought too, when Mycroft does his, like, he's playing them and he's like, no, shoot John, obviously because he's useless. I thought that was like a really courageous move for that character that I didn't expect. And if he would have gone out that way, I think it would have been really, really arresting. But there is entirely too much Mycroft in Sherlock and in this episode for my taste personally.
Totally. They all get knocked unconscious. John finds himself deep in water in a well, whereas Sherlock finds himself back at his family home at the same time that the plane is going to crash right into London inside the well. John finds out that there are not dog bones, but child bones. And then Sherlock runs out to the gravestones. He does a weird magic thing with all these numbers, and he figures out, seek my room. And he goes inside, Euros is inside, and he talks to her. And he loves her. And she finds out that all she wanted was love. And then the whole day is saved. Euros is taken away, and Lestrade shows up, and Sherlock, for the very first time, calls Lestrade Greg. He says, thanks, Greg. So Euros is done. Sherlock gives Greg some nice little accolades, and then we get the final reveal of what Redbeard, excuse me, not Redbird, that's Robin's car. But Redbeard is a childhood friend of Sherlock's that Euros got jealous of. So what do you think about all these reveals, and basically John being stuck in a well like Lassie?
Yeah, so I think the episode kind of crumbled when we first got to Sharonford, and this is where it really all falls apart for me. It's called The Final Problem. It's a pretty problematic ending to this episode. So Euros is basically so crazy and like such a maladjusted child. I mean, they're all pretty maladjusted Holmes children, that she just like straight up murders this kid that Sherlock used to play pirates with.
She was jealous.
Like, what? First of all, if she's like the same age as this kid, there's no way she could push him into a well. Second off, that's horrible. Third off, she managed to orchestrate this whole thing, but then somehow has a psychotic break and is like crying in her room, and Sherlock hugging her is enough. And then John is chained up in the well, but we just throw like a rope down to him and it's all okay. We're not even gonna like throw a saw down to pretend like we're gonna cut the cord or whatever.
Well, let me point out that the thing is like her murdering the kid is supposed to be horrible. So that you can't throw that against it. You said that like that's just horrible. Well, yeah, it's supposed to be horrible. That's the point. It's child murder.
I just found it like surprisingly horrible.
Well, we've seen just as bad things on this show.
We've seen no child murder up to this point, though. They tease child murder a lot.
That's true.
Moriarty skirts it quite a bit, but we've never actually like killed a child. And I think, to me, it feels like an afterthought because we did the dog thing and we're like, oh, isn't it cute? Sherlock liked his dog in season 3.
I mean, to me, that's not even a problem with. I don't really have a problem with that. The problem that I more have with is the fact that Sherlock has been talking this entire episode to her sister and didn't realize that it was his sister.
Right.
And that it was like her delusions. But the fact of the matter is that Eros willingly switched back and forth. So Eros is somehow Euros. I don't even care what her name is. Stupid Holmes sibling is what I'm going to call her from here on out.
Yeah.
Stupid Holmes sibling can switch from will to her nightmare back to her conscious self to fool Sherlock. Think about that for a second. Doesn't quite make sense, does it?
Not even a little bit.
Yeah.
I will say that I liked once we got over all that nonsense and we were just conveniently back at the Holmes estate, because whatever. I like seeing Lestrade because I love this version of Lestrade. I think he's like fantastic. And this is the first time Sherlock's ever called him Greg. Yep. There's a whole joke in Hound of the Baskervilles about how he doesn't know what his name is.
In this season, he's been mistaking his names.
Yeah, which is really nice. And then Greg in return says, no, he's not a great man. He's also a good man, which is a callback to the first season where he goes, yeah, you're a great man, but are you a good one? So it's nice to see these characters come full circle and like actually be buddies.
Sure.
And I think that is a great jumping off point to kind of the conclusion of the episode where we really see Sherlock and John building their life together back at 221B. So I think like the last 5 minutes of this episode are like really stellar because it's just them being bros again, kind of like the last 5 minutes of the previous episode. But the unfolding of the mystery is so sloppy.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what happens in the final minutes here. So we have this giant montage, right, where Mycroft talks to the parents. We get to see Laurel Carlton Cumblepatch again.
Yeah.
He shows up again. And Sherlock visits Euros, and they play violin a lot together.
I thought that was a nice touch.
And then we find out that there's a new DVD from Mary, and Mary basically is like, hey, John and Sherlock, this is a nice little epilogue for you. And then we get a hero shot of John and Sherlock like running out of Rathbone House. Now, let's talk about that Easter egg.
This was my favorite Easter egg. This is my favorite moment, probably, of the whole episode. Rathbone House is named for Basil Rathbone, who is probably the most famous movie Sherlock Holmes. He was the guy who played Sherlock Holmes in the films basically for the whole beginning of the 20th century.
Would you consider him the best Sherlock Holmes? I kind of do.
I would consider him the best classic Sherlock Holmes.
Okay, got it.
But he's a very important figure in Sherlock mythology. I just thought it was a really nice nod. I didn't need the goodbye and the kind of summing up to be from Mary. I thought we'd put that to bed really nicely with her ghost in the last episode. But I think it's a nice speech, and I think it's a nice sentiment, and it's a nice beat to end these characters on, because we always end with Sherlock and John at odds, and it was so nice to see them end as friends.
I'm also glad that we didn't end on another cliffhanger.
Uh-huh.
Like, this is the first Sherlock season that has not ended on a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
And I kind of like that, but I also kind of wonder if they did that because they're not certain they're coming back.
That's quite possible. Did you?
Even though there is a fifth season. They've said that there is a fifth season. They signed them for a fifth season. But go ahead, and what were you saying?
There are swirling rumors that there might not be. I thought it was interesting that they decided to move back into 221B after they destroyed it. I will say in the final solution, the original canon story, their flat gets burned down, so it's kind of cool that it got exploded here. But I thought they would have just moved into John's home because it's a house.
Much nicer.
Why would you move back into this tiny little apartment?
Because
I like that they had the baby. It was cute.
Because then it's not 22-1 Baker Street.
I know, but like really, like you should have just moved into the house.
No, John's house is much nicer. So yeah.
Now we are going to move into the section where we rate this episode. As always, it is a scale from 1 to 5, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. Jason, what did you think about the final problem?
I'm glad that it's finally over.
Ooh, burn.
You know, this episode I thought started off really good.
I agree.
And then I was kind of interested in it, and with the whole Mycroft thing, and I was like, oh, this reveal of Euros is actually going to be
interesting.
I might actually be into this. And then when it turned into the island of Dr. Moreau, I was like,
I wish there had been cat people.
Oh, man, that would have made this episode so much better, actually. I'm surprised there weren't cat people in it as far-fetched into reality as this was.
Yeah.
This was actually the first episode of Sherlock where I was like, oh, well, the doctor's going to show up at any time.
Yeah. Peter Capaldi, come on in.
Here comes Peter Capaldi to shave Benedict Cumberbatch. I'm going to give it a 2.
Yeah.
I was not a big fan of this episode. It was after last week's episode that I thought was great. This was quite a letdown.
I would agree. I think that this episode really took a big slide back from everything that we built in the first 2 episodes. And I don't want to give it a 1 because that sounds really mean, so I guess I will also give it a 2. And I will say that I thought Euros was a terrible character and a terrible dramatic device, but I think the actress did a really good job.
Totally.
And I thought she grounded the character in a really interesting way, so I do want to applaud her for her performance. I thought she did a great job. Let's rate this season overall, season 4 of Sherlock. Again, a scale of 1 to 5, what are you going to give it?
Well, out of curiosities, I guess we're going to announce now, because I was going to just ask you what you would have given the previous seasons, but we're going to announce now that going forward from here, because so many of you guys have requested in the comments that we're gonna we're gonna start back at episode 1.
Study in Pink.
A Study in Pink, and we're gonna each Sunday until Doctor Who comes back.
Yep.
We're gonna go back through the old Sherlock. So you can consider these Sherlock Sundays.
Aww.
So that's what we're gonna do. So next week is gonna be episode 1 of season 1, and we're gonna work our way up into this season. So only 9 more weeks.
There you go.
This season, I still think was better than last season.
I agree.
But not by much. So, I mean, a 3? I'm going to give this season a 3. It's right in the middle. It's not terrible.
Yeah.
But it's not great.
Yeah. I agree. I would have given last season, I think probably a 1, because I think I got some problems with my third season of Sherlock. Since we don't do halves, I guess I'll also give it a 3, but it's like a 3.0. It's like the lowest 3 I could possibly give it. I think there are some solid, really good Sherlock detective moments and some good Sherlock and John moments, but there's just a lot of accessory stuff that could have been slimmed down and it would have been a better season overall.
It seemed like this season was more about the supporting characters than Sherlock or John. Like, it seemed like this season was more about Mary, Mycroft, and the stupid Sherlock sibling, because I'm not saying her name anymore.
Right, and the show is called Sherlock. We're watching for Sherlock.
Yep.
So seeing it get lost along the way is a little disappointing.
And just to compare, like I think season 3 was all about the marriage and not about John.
I agree.
So there you go.
And just to let you know, this episode was brought to you by Majorspoilers.com, the comic book website where they love comics and they know that you do too.
All right, guys, just to announce, this Wednesday, Ashley and I are launching a Kickstarter for our 5-issue miniseries, Jupiter Jet. So go out there, check it out, go to Kickstarter, and support us on Wednesday. You're going to get all 5 issues of the comic book and lots of other cool awards and perks, including a Jupiter Jet exclusive to Kickstarter print by Wonder Woman artist Nicholas Scott. You want to check that out. It's so cool. Please go over there and help support our comic book. Let us know down in the comments what you think about all this stuff. Click subscribe. We'll see you next Sunday for more Sherlock Sunday goodness. Indubitably. Didn't even say that right. I don't care.